it's an honor to introduce Dr. Dora Schriro, former Director of the Arizona Department of Corrections, former Special Advisor to U.S. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano, and current Commissioner of the Department of Correction in New York City.
Good morning, everyone. It is a great treat to be home. I'm going to do something that I don't ordinarily do, which is look at my notes occasionally. I had the great pleasure while I was director here in Arizona to also teach at the law school. They let me run wild and do a correction law seminar, and I always try to be careful when I'm citing cases for that reason alone. So I have the splendid opportunity of just trying to lay out some of the issues that we'll be considering in the course of the day, and I'll keep an eye on my watch because this is a topic about which I have great passion. I want to stop for a moment and just think about what the law says are the differences, if any, between civil detention and criminal incarceration. And then I also want to think about those things that are similar, which of course never means that they are the same. And in those differences, we will find some considerable differences. And then as time allows, introduce some of the other issues that we'll be talking about today. So as I'm sure all of you have come to know, that as a matter of law, immigration detention is absolutely unlike criminal incarceration. ICE cannot incarcerate an alien for a criminal violation. Its authority is solely administrative. ICE may only detain an alien during the removal process, which is, of course, a civil proceeding conducted exclusively in the civil courts. It can never be used for the purpose of punishment. That's something that's pretty obvious but worth restating. Civil detention can never be used for the purpose of punishment. And yet, notwithstanding these black letter differences, immigration detention and civil and criminal incarceration are most often seen as exactly one and the same by the public at large. And this, of course, is a real problem. Further clouding these very important legal distinctions, both civil and criminally confined populations are managed in strikingly similar ways, so as to further blur that very important distinction. Typically, both civil and criminal detainees are held in secure facilities with hardened perimeters in remote locations, and generally a considerable distance from both counsel and their own communities. With few exceptions, the facilities that ICE continues to use today to detain aliens were originally built as jails and prisons to incarcerate pretrial and sentenced offenders. By and large, these facilities continue to operate true to their original mission. Their design and construction, the staffing plans, the programs to the extent that they're provided at all, and the supervision strategies are largely based upon traditional concepts, specifically command and control. Further, although the majority of detained aliens are members of intact families, maintain homes in the community, and were gainfully employed, immigration detention facilities adhere to the same detention management practices of jails and prisons, which means me, the jailer, I make all of the decisions for all of the individuals who are being held in those facilities and under that authority. And so that means that civil detainees have all of the most basic decisions: when to get up, when to go to sleep, what to eat, what to wear, as just some of the most basic examples. We make all of those decisions for them. Establishing standards and articulating expectations expressly for civil detention continues to be our country's challenge, and indeed its ongoing opportunity, just realigning our nation's core values with our day-to-day practices. And so today, in all of our conversations, we have a chance to think out loud what it is that civil detention ought to look like, who it ought to touch, and how it ought to go about its business. I want to stop for a moment and also think a bit about these things that are similar but not the same. because again, perhaps better understood by this group, but not well known by the public at large, are several of these really significant differences. First is that as a result of reform, that's an odd word, but of all of the reforms in immigration law, particularly those as recently as 1996, there are wide groups of individuals who must be detained. It's mandatory detention. And so there's far less discretion on the civil side than there is on the criminal side as to who it actually would come to a jail, such as the New York City Department of Correction or here in Maricopa County, and for how long and under what circumstances. The mandatory detention it creates all sorts of problems, and the court is cornerstone to any of the fundamental reforms in immigration that we hope to accomplish. Some of the other ones also are truly important. For example, the Miranda warning. I think all of us have seen so many shows that we just believe that the Miranda is something that is given to anybody at the time that they are first apprehended. That first, that law enforcement would identify themselves as such, and then they would tell them that anything that they say can and may be used against them. That is absolutely not the case when it comes to civil detention or to the enforcement of civil immigration laws. And so on an ongoing basis, individuals are stopped and questioned, and then the answers that they provide are used in proceedings as to whether or not to hold them, how long to hold them, and whether or not ultimately to consider removal. The other thing that's terrifically important that the public in general doesn't know and maybe doesn't care very much about is that the right to publicly funded legal representation, of course, is not provided to those who are held on allegations of either entering or remaining unlawfully in this country. And yet the consequences can be every bit as much as devastating, although removal as a matter of law is not deemed to be punishment. It is simply the thing that happens when you are here and should not be. One of the other things that's particularly striking as a difference now between the practice of criminal incarceration and civil detention is that on the criminal side, wherever we can, we look for ways to reduce our average daily population. We look for opportunities to close housing units and indeed to shut down whole prisons. And around the country, this is in fact what continues to happen. In New York State, where I am now, the state correctional system has closed a number of whole facilities. And in the jail system, we too are looking to downsize. We're in the process of demolishing 4,000 beds, all of them on Rikers Island, because there has been an appreciable reduction in incarceration rates and incarceration practices in the city and in the state. But here you have a Congress that funds a capacity when it comes to civil detention. It's currently 32,400, and the general activity inside of ICE is to take this as a mandate so that all of those beds must be filled. Now that's a striking difference, of course, with the criminal side, where even though a prison system here, for example, Arizona, which I had the great opportunity to run, if you could shut down a housing unit, a portion of Lewis Prison, for example, or a whole facility, that is exactly what you would do, even though you had received funding for what the full complement of a census might be. And so this is perhaps a place to press further and harder. And the last and perhaps most important difference, something that I mentioned in my early remarks, are the fundamental differences in the populations that are being incapacitated. Civil detainees versus persons, whether they are pretrial, so charged but not yet pled or proven guilty, or those who have pled or proven guilty and are now serving a sentence. And these differences in the people themselves, I think, is perhaps as informative as anything to today's conversation, which is who do we have and what do we do with them, and how do we feel about the things that we are doing with them and for them and sometimes against them. The civilly detained population is made up approximately one-half of individuals that are referred to as criminal aliens. And it sounds like something from out of space, but these are individuals who have been convicted or have pled guilty to one or more felony offenses in the course of their adult life. But as I said before, whatever time that was imposed upon them has been served in full, because ICE also, as a matter of its authorizing statutes, cannot take someone who is still serving a criminal sentence. What struck me as I traveled the country and spent considerable time in over 25 facilities in all regions operated on behalf of ICE is that the civilly detained population, although half were criminal aliens, relatively fewer than 10% at the time that I made my study, and it's still the case today, were ever found guilty or pled guilty of dangerous offenses. And so to the extent that they have been offenders, they have been offenders of largely nonviolent offenses, many of them traffic offenses, and also drug offenses. This population in general is interested in maintaining good institutional conduct, if I was to toggle to the way we would describe it on the criminal side, for one of two reasons. Either they are not fighting the removal and they want to be released quickly, so they're not going to do anything to stretch that out. Or, as is the case with many of them, they desperately want to stay. And they are making their very base case as to why they should remain in the country. So whether the motive is, I want to leave as quickly as possible, or I want to stay here for the rest of my life, there are very few incidents that occur in the course of operating a civil detention facility. Later today in the panel, I'll be talking a bit more about this. But some of the things that are particularly striking deals with the infrastructure of ICE and its ability to really effectively assess what is the propensity for violence, which is the fundamental basis for assigning someone to a custody level, low, medium, or high, in a correctional setting. It's a practice that ICE has adopted and applied on the civil side as well. And indeed, for those of you who work in or have gone to a facility, you'll see that ICE actually directs their providers to dress the inmates out in 3 different colored uniforms, red usually signifying high custody. It's an interesting thing, though, about the custody classification method, because they take individuals who have lived in all parts of the country, and if they are criminal aliens that may have committed their offenses in any part of the country, and yet their risk assessment instrument is not modulated for the criminal codes of 50 states. And so they take these lump sums, for example, all sexual offenses, which go from peeping Tom at the least, one of the least serious, to a sexual assault of the most grievous kind, and they get a score as a sex offense. And so the whole notion about how accurate the actual risk assessment scores are is of considerable concern. But having said that, when you look for those individuals, men and women, usually men, in those red uniforms, ever so frequently are you going to see them acting out in a way that you would see a high custody population in a criminal facility conduct themselves. So for all of those reasons, there are these bright line black law differences, and yet there are some similarities that really blur the conversation. And it is up to all of us to make clear what it is that we ought to do, what is permissible, but more fundamentally than that, what is desirable, what really gets closest to our core values. It's a great pleasure for me being back in New York City to pass the Statue of Liberty almost on a daily basis. And I think for many of us in the country, that is still our notion about who we are and how we welcome the tired and the weary. And then there's everything else that we do that appears in the media and in our communities on a daily basis. And it's for us, both our challenge and our great opportunity to reconcile those differences. So I'll be talking to you later today. Thank you so very much.